Hello and welcome to Watercolour Workshop, and today I'm painting a very simple landscape with two paints, two brushes and a button. So I'm painting on a watercolour block. It's a sea white block. It's 25% cotton, 20 centimetres or 8 inches square. I've got some raw sienna and squares a little blob out on a plate. I'm using a plate for a palette. This week I thought it might make the mixing process easier to follow if you're a beginner. So I've diluted the paint a very slight amount and I've painted it onto the dry surface of the block, adding water to it there. I'm painting stripes across from left to right and right to left. Now as I'm watching this back, I'm thinking, why didn't I choose a bigger brush? It would have been way easier. My number one tip to beginners is always use a bigger brush, and here I am using a size 8 round synthetic when really I could use double that size. It would make this job much easier, because the more you paint backwards and forwards like this, the less effective it is, I think. In other words, watercolour always seems better the less effort you put in. Anyway, I'm stuck with this now. So I painted a yellow stripe across the middle. It's not perfectly even, and that's fine. So for the sky, I wet the top of the block first, and then I put the diluted paint in. This is indigo, by the way, and it's quite a strong colour. So I always start off with a diluted section first, just to gauge how strong my mix is. You could also test on a scrap of paper. Once the diluted paint is on, I can then thicken it, strengthen it rather, with some less dilute paint, and then blend the two areas together. So again, it's a bit painful watching this. I should have gone with a bigger brush. I got so fed up, I sped it up in the end. Okay, I'm tipping the block just to let the pigment run down a little bit and become a bit more even. And I'm repeating the process in the very foreground of the painting along the bottom. So far all we have done is paint 3 stripes. A yellow one in the middle, blue one along the top, and a blue stripe along the bottom. And then we let that dry. Well, sorry, no. As I'm painting the blue, the yellow is drying, and you can see that from the sheen on the paper. You can see that the yellow area is now practically dry. So I've mixed up some green, which is the blue and the yellow together. And I'm painting a simple hill profile along the middle of the painting. I don't have a drawing. If you're an absolute beginner, you might find it easier to start with a simple drawing. But it's not a complicated subject. It's basically stripes across the page. As I apply the green, I'm adding in slightly varying amounts of yellow and blue each time to give myself different greens. So you can see that some of it is more blue and some of it is more green. And that's deliberate. Now I'm painting the horizon line. So it's one single stroke, as neat as I can get it across the middle. Next, I am strengthening the sky section just above the hill. I've let the hill dry. Applying some of the yellow because I want to put in a very faint sun. Just caught the top of the hill there, it's still slightly damp. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just softening off the extra yellow with some clean water there. Here's my button from a shirt, a spare button from a shirt. And here's some kitchen roll or tissue. And all you do is press it into the tissue, twist it round a little bit, and you've got a circular piece of tissue which you can then wet with some clean water and press that into the wet sky area. If your paint's dried at this point, you can still do this. It might be a little bit harder to do. It depends on the paper that you use. Some papers are easier to lift off from than others. But there we are. A nice round circular sun. So now it's back to painting stripes. These are slightly darker stripes because these are in the foreground. Colours tend to be more saturated in the foreground. And effectively what I'm painting now is some ripples in the estuary, in the sand. As with the hill, I am slightly varying the mix each time to give myself some different blues. As I come down the painting, I come into the foreground. The paper's slightly drier and I'm using drier paint. And I'm dragging the brush across the stripes to give myself a slightly broken texture, and there tends to be more detail in the foreground. Now, speaking of detail, I thought the hills were a little bit dull, so I'm adding some of this blue into the hill section to try to give the suggestion of different hills. So adding blue pushes something further back, so it kind of pushes that hill back and brings the hill on the left slightly forward, trying to get the illusion of a range of hills there. Randomly decided to add a little bit of vegetation, not quite sure why I did that. Now some more vegetation along the base of the hill. So we can imagine that beyond the river estuary there's a cliff and there's some vegetation growing on the bottom, some trees and shrubs, and then cliff face and the section on the right, which is a little bit lumpy and bumpy, that could be some distant trees. Back to the foreground. The painting's dry and I am dampening the stripes to remove some of the paint. If the sun is shining above them, even though it's a setting sun, they'd be slightly lighter in colour. So I'm effectively adding some sunlight or reflected light here by lightening the colour. So you dampen with some clean water and then you lift it out with some clean tissue. Here's the one and only time I used a slightly bigger brush. Decided I should do the same on the yellow bit of the sand, on the light blue area. So again, dampen it off with clean water and then press to blot that water out with a clean tissue. And that's it, it's as simple as that. We've painted it a series of stripes pressed in a round circle, and we've got a painting of an estuary scene. Very simple landscape. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and you found it useful. And maybe join me again next time. Thank you for watching.